Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Frank Clark, and it's so great to be with you again for another episode of Psychiatric Times' Psyched Perspectives. I'm so thankful and excited to be joined by my guest, my colleague, and friend, Dr. Jessie Hill, who is a board certified adult psychiatrist and as well as a forensic psychiatrist who is a beloved Arkansasian, loves her Razorbacks. She is a devoted mother, a devoted spouse. She always fights for the little guy. She has served our country with passion and dedication. Dr. Hill was a naval officer, as a psychiatrist, as a naval officer for many years. And I've had the pleasure of working with her at Prisma Health for the last 4 years or so in many clinical environments, including our consult liaison service, as well as doing a little bit of outpatient. She is a very passionate about resident education and working with residents and medical students. And today I'm happy for her to talk about transitions because she kind of took a non-traditional path as it relates to her education. She was an attending psychiatrist for many years and then decided to go back and pursue a fellowship in forensics, which I'm thankful for, and many of my colleagues are as well. And so, without further ado, welcome, Dr. Hill.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited
Yeah,
to be here, Dr. Clark.
absolutely. So, I know that when I first met you, you had talked about this passion, this dream to pursue a career in forensic psychiatry. And I almost kind of felt there was like this regret that you didn't do it sooner. So I would be curious to hear you talk about one, why forensic psychiatry, and given that you did go back and kind of take a unconventional path, because a lot of times people do not, they usually go to residency and then fellowship. If you could talk about that and kind of this pieces of advice that you would have for people who are maybe thinking about going back to fellowship after many years of practice.
Sure. Well, first question being why forensic psychiatry? So I did a rotation at a state forensic psychiatric unit when I was in medical school and fell in love with the patient population. The longevity of working with the patients, how long you get to spend with them, which really fosters this very unique care environment of really just getting to know the person on a daily basis, like stopping and saying hello to them when they're outside of their cottages and knowing about their families. And it really created this like intimacy in patient care within people who have been committed to forensic psychiatric units that I felt like was had a lot to be admired. And then I got really interested, once I really started to learn the nuances and all of the ways that mental health intersects with the legal system. And it essentially opened my eyes to this whole knowledge base that is so applicable to our clinical daily work that I feel like as general psychiatrists, we just don't get as comprehensive of a training on all these things that are so relevant to our clinical daily work. And so then, as far as why I went back to forensics, um, so I had wanted to do forensics since medical school, but then with the military, I had my naval obligation and I had to serve 4 years after residency. And just the way fellowships work in the military, I didn't want to extend my service beyond what the 8 years I was obligated to. And so I had always planned to go back to fellowship after that 4 year contract. Well, when that time came, I did get accepted to a fellowship program, but it was actually in the peak of COVID. I had an infant and a toddler, and honestly, it was overwhelming to think about going back to fellowship at that time. And the hardest decision I've ever made in my life probably was to not go to fellowship at that juncture. And instead, I moved to Greenville and took this consult liaison position. And then 2 years went by, and in that entire 2 years, the pull to forensics got increasingly stronger. The regret got more noticeable to the people I was around. And so I took the dive and went back. So I had been practicing for 6 years at that point, when I finally went back to fellowship in 2023. And it was absolutely 100% the right decision. It was hard to really see my career without having tried. In forensics, you never know. There are a lot of people who go into forensics and don't end up clinically or don't end up practicing in the field. That's a pretty high rate of people. And that weighed in my mind of the sacrifice and then the amount of people who don't actually end up doing forensics. But I felt determined. And also, I'll say what I learned that was a little unexpected. It wasn't planned, but what I ended up figuring out is that it was actually ideal for me to have been practicing for 6 years and then to go back. Because the thing about forensics is it really is a bit counterintuitive to come straight out of fellowship and then be testifying as an expert without being board certified, without having ever practiced independently. You don't have the credibility that you need to testify as an expert. So then what ends up happening is you go off and you get board certified and you start practicing and then you get established, and it's hard to go back. You're now years out of fellowship. You've been practicing somewhere. Familiarity is easy and comfortable. And so then I think that's part of the reason why people end up getting the fellowship and not practicing, is because you can't do it right after the fellowship in most situations. But I was able to. I opened my company while I was in fellowship training. I got a lawyer. I opened my LLC. I took my first case 3 weeks after leaving fellowship. So I was really able to hit the ground running, and that was a unique opportunity because I had already been practicing for 6 years.
I was not aware of that, and that makes a lot of sense. And so it sounds like too, when I'm hearing that this was a dream deferred for you in a lot of ways, with obviously the pandemic impacted us in many different ways. And I'm glad that you were continuing to be resilient and tenacious about following that dream, because sometimes people will say, well, maybe this is not what I'm supposed to do, but it sounds like you had the fortitude and the foresight to continue to pursue that dream. And from talking with you, since you've completed fellowship, I know that you have thrived, and as it relates to testifying. And one thing I know is your motto is you always fight for the little guy. And along those lines, I would love for our listeners and viewers to hear more about that. Where does that passion for advocacy for that little guy or little girl come from? Because I think we all have that in some sense. In a way, we wouldn't be in medicine if we didn't. But especially when it relates to the field of forensics, there are so many things to think about, and as we're trying to advocate. So could you share more about that?
Yeah. So that's something that goes back as far as I can remember, this pull to advocate for people who don't have someone advocating for them. I mean, many of us as physicians come from caring involved families. And if we don't, there was probably some caring involved mentor along the way that guided us. We have our network of people who would advocate for us if something were to happen, but there's so many people who really have no one advocating for them, or the people that they do have don't know how to advocate. And so often those individuals find themselves in the criminal justice system. And it really takes one person who's connected, one person who has the platform and the voice to be able to say, let's think about this a little differently, or maybe this can be diverted in some way, or which, fortunately, the justice system is really moving towards a diversion based model, which is the perfect timing as a forensic psychiatrist to be coming up, because the justice system is saying, look, we want to think about this differently and we need your help. But that as far as in the criminal justice system, advocacy, you have to be very careful, right? You're an advocate of your opinion and you're an advocate of your experience, but that does often translate into kind of advocacy for the mentally ill, or advocacy for people who have had various life experiences, where sometimes it just comes down to, let's give context to this person and understand what it is that led, like, what are the breadcrumbs that led us to where we are today. And just giving that context can invoke sympathy in people. It can invoke a sense of understanding, a sense of wanting to treat opposed to punish sometimes. So it is just, and as I said, in the criminal justice system, particularly within the indigent defense realm, sometimes you encounter these individuals, and you almost wonder if they've ever had anyone kind of in their corner, telling their perspective, like, let me tell your story, because they don't have the platform to do it, and they don't have the money to pay for the big wig attorney who will go to the ends of the earth to uncover that story. And so it's a really unique opportunity that I find a lot of fulfillment in.
Well, a lot of what you said has resonated with me, especially you know that I work in the correctional system as a correctional psychiatrist on Fridays at our local detention center, and I really enjoy working with the population, and for all the reasons that you mentioned. And a lot of the times when I'm working with the residents, I always share with them of hearing their narrative, getting a sense of, okay, they're in this predicament, in this environment for a reason. And for me, it always goes back to adverse childhood experiences. I was reading something the other day as I was preparing for a panel discussion on physician advocacy as it relates to individuals who have been incarcerated or are currently incarcerated. And I read a statistic that 98% of individuals who are incarcerated have at least one ACE, or
Mm-hmm.
adverse childhood experience, which wasn't surprising to me. If you think about as it relates to neglect or abuse or household dysfunction. And so for me, that allows me, when I see that number, it allows me to remember to have grace for those individuals that I'm providing care for. Because you're right, you and I had role models growing up. When I asked my patients in the detention center what was lacking in their childhood or throughout their life, they will say the absence of not having a mother figure or a father figure, or um, this that emotional neglect, or not feeling validated. And I think that has been a theme that I've heard throughout my time at the detention center. So everything you were saying, I was just thinking about my interaction with individuals who are in custody and how we do need to advocate for them in every way we can. I have two more questions for you. So, Dr. Hill, what type of legacy would you like to leave as a forensic psychiatrist?
Um, Tough question. But on the spot, I would say that if I would want someone to describe me many years down the road, what I'm striving for is a forensic psychiatrist, a asset to the community, an asset to the courts, an asset to the judicial system, in a way, because of a high level of integrity to and adherence to the principles that govern what we know about psychiatry, in combination with what I think and hope is perceived as an ability to elicit information that other people don't. And so much of that comes down to patience, picking up on things that are subtle, listening to instincts. And it's kind of that in combination that I feel like allows me to see things in a way that is a unique perspective that maybe others haven't before me, that still adheres to that high degree of integrity and foundational psychiatric clinical practice.
Well, I believe, well, not only I believe, I know because I have seen you display that level of integrity and industrious attitude. And that just goes along with your moral compass. So I have no doubt that that will spill over into your work as a forensic psychiatrist. So I appreciate you sharing that. This is a little easier question as we round out this episode. What are you most proud of outside of being a psychiatrist?
Oh, that's easy. You know the answer to that, Dr. Clark. Um, the reason I didn't go to forensic psychiatry in the first place, which is my children, my family, the life that I've created outside of my profession that keeps me balanced. I could easily Many people in my orbit were concerned I would turn into Aaron Brockovich, right? Like, and just get lost to forensic psychiatry. And I think that could absolutely be the case if I didn't have a very grounding presence at home. And I'll say, that with going back, I was able to go back to forensics when my children were in a stage of life that they were more independent. So that was part of the equation with returning, is that, I had children that were a little bit more independent, and, I'm able to talk to them about what I do and the role that I serve. And you should have seen my daughter's face when I told her I had to go talk to a judge the other day. And she's so proud. And, it's just a reflection of, the reason why I'm here, which is to be a role model for them, while getting to do this amazing, fulfilling job.
Well, I have met your family and I know that they are very proud of you. And as a parent, a fellow parent, I think that's one of the biggest gifts we can give to our children, are modeling for them, and fighting for that person each and every day. So I appreciate everything that you do for your family, for your patients, for your community, and for your profession. And I appreciate you being willing, although there was some reluctance, I know, on your part initially, but I appreciate you taking the bull by the horns and joining me
Yeah.
for this episode. So, well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Until next time, peace and blessings.